Hello and welcome to Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world. I'm Teniola Shobowale. On the program this week, Russia holds its annual Victory Day parade on Moscow's Red Square to commemorate the end of World War II as its forces continue to strike targets in Ukraine. Russia's Victory Day parade, which celebrates the Soviet Union's Second World War victory, was held in Moscow's Red Square on Monday. During the parade, President Vladimir Putin made a speech where he addressed the invasion of Ukraine and told troops they are fighting for the future of the country.
A patriotic display of raw military power amid the Ukraine's conflict. This year, Victory Day parades were held in 27 other cities across the country. Around 65,000 participants, including officers and soldiers from Russia's 5 military districts and trainees from military schools, took part. You are fighting for the homeland so that no one forgets the lessons of World War II. This was Russian President Vladimir Putin's rallying cry to his soldiers in a speech evoking the memory of Soviet heroism on the 77th anniversary of victory against Nazi Germany. Addressing mass ranks of servicemen on Red Square during the annual Victory Day parade, President Putin condemned what he called external threats to weaken and split Russia.
Preparations were openly underway for another punitive operation in Donbass and an invasion of our historic lands, including Crimea. Kiev has announced a possible acquisition of nuclear weapons. The NATO bloc began active military development of the territories adjacent to ours. This was an absolutely unacceptable threat, systematically created for us and right on our borders. You are fighting for the motherland, for its future, so that no one forgets the lessons of World War II, so that there is no place in the world for executioners and Nazis.
He also acknowledged the cost in Russian lives, pledging to help families of fallen soldiers. But his 11-minute speech on day 75 of the invasion of Ukraine was largely notable for what he did not say. He did not mention Ukraine by name, gave no assessment of progress in the war, and offered no indication of how long it might continue. Since 2008, under Putin, Victory Day has become an occasion not only to honor the sacrifices of a previous generation, over in Ukraine, the mood was defiant. In an address, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on the anniversary of triumph over Nazism, the country was fighting for a new victory.
The road to victory is difficult, but we have no doubts that we will win. There are no shackles that can bind our free spirit. There is no occupier who can take root in our free land. There is no invader who can rule over our free people. Sooner or later, we win. We win because this is our land. We are fighting from freedom for our children, and therefore we will win.
Ukrainian officials said heavy fighting was underway in the east of the country and want people to take cover from expected missile strikes. As the war continues, peace talks between the two sides are ongoing. But the United States believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin is preparing for a long conflict in Ukraine, and a Russian victory in the Donbass in the east of the country might not end the war.
The next month or two of fighting will be significant as the Russians attempt to reinvigorate their efforts, but even if they are successful, we are not confident that the fight in the Donbass will effectively end the war. We assess President Putin is preparing for a prolonged conflict in Ukraine, during which he still intends to achieve goals beyond the Donbass. But Putin most likely also judges that Russia has a greater ability and willingness to endure challenges than his adversaries, and he is probably counting on U.S. and EU resolve to weaken as food shortages, inflation, energy prices get worse. Moreover, as both Russia and Ukraine believe they can continue to make progress militarily, we do not see a viable negotiating path forward, at least in the short term. The uncertain nature of the battle, which is developing into a war of attrition, combined with the reality that Putin faces a mismatch between his ambitions and Russia's current conventional military capabilities, likely means the next few months could see us moving along a more unpredictable and potentially escalatory trajectory.
According to the United Nations, thousands of civilians have been killed in the war.
The actual figures are higher. The big black hole is really Mariupol, where it's been difficult for us to fully access and to get fully corroborated information. We estimate that there are thousands of deaths that have happened there, civilians who have died due to hostilities. However, we are yet to be able to fully corroborate those, and so not able to add them to our corroborated figures. In Bucha and other settlements to the north of Kiev that were occupied by Russian armed forces, we have reports of the unlawful killing of over 300 men, women, and children. Unfortunately, these numbers will continue to grow as we visit more areas. Overall, to date, we have corroborated 7,061 civilian casualties, with 3,381 killed and 3,680 injured across the country since the beginning of the armed attack by the Russian Federation. The actual figures are higher, and we are working to corroborate every single incident.
Moscow denies targeting civilians and calls its invasion, launched on February 24th, a special military operation to disarm Ukraine and rid it of what it calls anti-Russian nationalism fomented by the West. Ukraine and the West say this is a false pretext for waging an unprovoked war of aggression.
Meanwhile, United Nations agencies are warning that price hikes sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine will worsen a food crisis in Africa. In Zimbabwe, fuel prices are rising and the currency rapidly devaluing. The country's annual inflation jumped to 96% in April, up from 61% in January. This has had an impact on fertilizer prices, which has hit small-scale farmers the hardest.
Due to the rise in fertilizer prices, Boniface Mutize, who grows maize and soybeans just outside Harare, has started making his own fertilizer by mixing cow dung or chicken waste with zinc. But he needs ammonium nitrate, which is not produced in large quantities in Zimbabwe.
We are doing our own fertilizer now. We are mixing 7 bags of cow dung or the cattle manure or the chicken waste with 20 mils of zinc to make compounds. But the difficult part of this is just compound. We need to do AN. It's very difficult to do AN, but we are producing AN at a very low quantity.
The war has disrupted shipping in the Black Sea, a major artery for grains and other commodities, throttling exports from Russia and Ukraine to markets including Africa. Ukraine has said the area sown with grains could fall by around 1/5 this year because of the war.
It's an almost grotesque situation that we see at the moment in Ukraine. There are nearly 25 million tons of grain that could be exported, but they cannot leave the country simply because of the lack of infrastructure and the blockade of the ports.
The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says nearly half of African countries rely on Russia and Ukraine for wheat imports. Russia is also a major supplier of fertilizer to at least 11 countries.
This war, the Ukraine war, is overlapping. The impact is overlapping with a crisis that has already been unfolding in several countries.
Even before the conflict in Ukraine, food inflation was pushing many African families to the brink. In Zimbabwe, where annual inflation jumped to 96% in April, up from 61% in January, households are already feeling the pain.
Prices have gone up in shops, meal number one, cooking oil, sugar, all those are basic things. Rentals have also gone up. So at the end of the day, what many Zimbabweans like myself are likely going to do is to earn a salary. Within 2 days, you must make sure you change that money from Zimbabwean dollar to US dollar, buy your basics.
We used to have 3 meals a day. We used to buy even meat. You could get meat and eat meat almost 5 days a week. But these days, you can even go for 7 days without getting any meat, without getting 3 meals a day. So it's really tough for people, and it's really tough for a basic family for a family that is living from basic salaries to have a good life.
In March, the Grain Millers Association of Zimbabwe hiked prices for wheat, flour and staple maize meal by about 15%, citing surging global prices linked to the Ukraine war.
Of late, there's a shortage of baking fat. So our baking fat comes mostly from South Africa. And then the oil, most of it is being made locally. But then it has also risen, I'm sure, due to the Ukraine war and also the fuel costs going up. So those are some of the major issues.
According to the Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency, about half Zimbabwe's 15 million people survive on less than $1.90 per day. The UN World Food Programme estimates that some 5.3 million Zimbabweans, around a third of the population, are food insecure.
And in Ukraine, grey and split into 2 parts, a motorway bridge in the town of Irpin captures a moment of people's sufferings during the war in a painting by Mexican artist Roberto Marquez. Marquez says he wants to deliver a universal message that the war is not right.
Upon a bridge split in 2 parts in the Ukrainian town of Irpin, Mexican artist Roberto Marquez is capturing the suffering of war by recreating the world-famous Guernica by Pablo Picasso.
What is happening that I can consider real important, bring it to the piece, and hopefully people will understand that I'm opposed 100% to what is happening. So the Guernica, I think, is a good example, and it will always be. It's a tragedy event. Picasso protested, and also I'm doing pretty much as he did.
In the original painting, Picasso reflected on the bombing of the eponymous Spanish town by Nazi troops in 1937. Marquez says war is not new, but holds out hope that one day in the future it ends.
I got something to say about it, and I picked the Guernica story because it's the only one that it tells us so close to what is happening now, that it happened in 1927, and it's happening again, and hopefully it doesn't happen in the future.
In early March, images of local residents sheltering under the bridge, which Ukrainian forces destroyed to slow the Russian advance, went viral. The maneuver made it difficult for thousands of people to get to safety. Ukraine seized back full control of the town at the end of March. Local resident Tetiana Slusarenko believes transmuting the pain of war into art can help to heal.
For us, it's very important because we can transform our pain and bring it onto this canvas. And in a way, we feel a bit better.
Amnesty International said there was compelling evidence that Russian troops had committed war crimes, including extrajudicial executions of civilians when they occupied an area outside Ukraine's capital in February and March. Moscow has denied that its forces committed abuses.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, heat wave triggers water shortages and health woes across India. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. As America marks the milestone of about 1 million deaths from COVID-19, children whose parents died from the virus are struggling to make sense of their loss. While deaths from COVID have slowed in recent weeks, according to officials, infections are rising again in the country, where most safety measures have now been relaxed.
David Garza's photo sits on a mantle in his family home, surrounded by candles, birthday balloons, and the silver urn containing his remains. Something his 12-year-old son Aiden says he can barely touch.
I don't like the feeling of him being cold because he's always a warm guy. Really cozy too. Every time I would hug him, I feel like I'm touching a cloud.
David collapsed on December 30th, 2020, while running errands, one of the now 1 million Americans who have died from COVID-19. While many look forward to the end of the pandemic, families such as Aiden's show its profound and enduring impact. His mother, Margaret, made sure that both her sons, Aiden and his brother Julius, now 14 years, had counseling to help deal with their grief.
The grief is the love that we have for your dad, that we'll never forget him because he's in our heart and our soul.
We always gotta save a little spot for him.
Absolutely, yeah.
But older brother Julius has had a tougher time accepting that sentiment. He remembers more than Aiden about what life was like before that day in 2015 when Margaret and David Garza adopted the boys who had been in the foster care system.
Dad dying was the most, was so far the saddest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. And I can never forgive that. Sometimes I would think about him, yes, mostly when we pray, and I'm always gonna love him.
Deep racial disparities among kids who lost at least one parent or caregiver to COVID reflects the course of a disease that has illuminated inequities in areas such as health care. Sandra McGowan Watts, whose husband Stephen Watts died of COVID in May of 2020, has been trying to maintain as much of her 13-year-old daughter Justice's routine as possible.
She does not talk about her grief, not to me, but then she'll do things that kind of mirror what he would do. Like this week I was off work, so we cleaned the garage and she went out to help me clean the garage, and she was cleaning the things that, you know, some of the things that he would normally do. Last summer, I remember the bushes looked like they needed to be trimmed, and she went and found his hedge cutters and started trimming the bushes. So she does things that he would do, but she doesn't talk about him per se.
No government program is tracking the number of American families in which at least one primary caregiver has died of COVID, but researchers estimate put the number at over 213,000. COVID-19 infections are rising again in the United States, and around 66% of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated. Most U.S. states and localities have eased mask and vaccination requirements.
Over in India, a fresh spell of sweltering heat is sweeping across parts of the country, including the capital, New Delhi. This has triggered water shortages, power cuts, and heat strokes.
A sweltering heat wave is sweeping across parts of northern India, including capital New Delhi, causing water shortages, power cuts, and heat strokes. After subsiding the past few days, temperatures in New Delhi have returned to dangerously hot levels. Those living in the slums have been impacted the worst, having to spend hours waiting for water trucks because they lack a piped water supply in their houses.
There is an obvious shortage of water due to the heat. The consumption of water increases. There is a rise in usage, but the supply of water is very limited, and that creates difficulties.
India suffered its hottest March in more than 100 years, and April saw many places, including New Delhi, recording unusually high temperatures in excess of 100 degrees on most days. More than 24 people have died of suspected heat strokes since late March, and power demand has hit multi-year highs.
Yeah, so extreme heat, of course, has a lot of impacts on human health. There's increased heat stress. There's also chances of heat stroke. And then, of course, at the worst, it can lead to human mortality or deaths if we see extreme heat for a long period of time. The second thing is, which we don't speak a lot about, is that not particularly for this heat wave, but in general, when we are seeing more and more heat, it's really going to change the kind of vector-borne diseases like malaria, like dengue that we see. So right now, we have particular parts of India that see the spread of these diseases. But the climate projections show that we are going to see other places that weren't seeing these diseases also to see the disease, as well as a larger number of people getting affected.
The National Disaster Management Authority has categorized 23 of India's 28 states and some 100 cities and districts as being at risk of suffering extreme heat. 19 states have already made their own heat action plans, and others are working on them.
And finally on the program, around 30 Hungarian couples with husbands carrying their wives on their backs raced over rough terrain this week in the nation's third wife-carrying contest. Among the obstacles the couples encountered on the 260-meter-long track were a deep water-filled ditch at the beginning and the end. Take a look.
This is a Hungarian wife-carrying race. Couples say the obstacle course requires balance, teamwork and a solid carrying technique. Most chose the piggyback technique.
I think it's a lot more uncomfortable for my partner because the weight is on my shoulders, so it's easy for me to run and I can balance.
About 30 couples faced a deep-water ditch, hay bales and car tires along this 260-meter-long track.
Get in!
I think the big interest is due to the fact that couples can leave their comfort zone of everyday life. And when a couple completes the race in one unit, they are very close to each other. So husband and wife can function as team builders here.
The winning couple said they perfected their technique for the second round, earning them first place overall.
We tried to improve our way of getting out of the water because at first I was worried about her and did not put my hands down. But in the second round, I put my hands down and it was a lot faster to get out. We also tried to push hard on the dry land.
The sport is said to have started in the Viking Age. In modern times, the tradition is particularly established in Finland, where it has taken place since the 1990s.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time. But remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. Bye for now.